Hi everyone. Thanks so much for joining. My name is Janice and I'm a PMM here at Avantiico. Today is session 2 of the 4-part webinar series on unlocking the power of finance automation. Just a quick reminder that our second session will be on July 11th at 10 a.m. Our third session will be on July July 11th at 10 a.m. Our second session will be on August 1st at 10 a.m. And then we'll also run a earlier session on August 22nd at 7 a.m. I also did want to let everyone on the call know really quickly that we have 2 half-day in-person events focused on Microsoft Dynamics 365 supply chain management. Both will be hosted in Southern California on June 12th and 13th from 9 a.m. to 1 p.m. Pacific. Just let us know if you're interested. And really quickly, we'll just go over the agenda for today's webinar. First, we'll go over existing gaps in ERP software that don't meet multi-company organizations' needs. Then Dan will walk through the advanced multi-company solution ISV and how it solves for those industry gaps with its features. He'll go over how to automate journal import to post process for multiple legal entities, and then show how to simplify third-party integrations with Azure. We'll then end with a Q&A, but if you have any questions during the call, just go ahead and pop them in the chat, and I will pass it back over to you, Dan. Hey, Dan, I think you are on mute.
Sure am. So thanks for the heads up. Thanks everybody for coming. My name is Dan McAllister. I'm a solution architect here with Avantiico. I apologize that the camera's not working for GoToMeeting, but I'm the product owner of the Advanced Multi-Company Automation Solution, or AMCS as we like to call it. We'll go through the agenda as Janice stated, so I've got a handful of slides that we'll go through, and then we'll jump into a demo. So please do ask questions in the chat, and I'd be happy to answer them as we go. So the AMCS solution is something that we have designed. It's been in place in one way or another since about 2011, going back to AX 2009. And it's meant to be a solution to help companies with many legal entities or with complex file-based integration needs to process data in an automated way. It's the time to implementation is extremely short. To give an example, which I'll talk about in more detail as we go through the slide deck, I'm currently implementing the solution for a company with over 200 legal entities, and from installation to end user training is going to be less than 2 weeks. So it's an extremely powerful solution. Time to value is very quick, and we think it's a powerful resolution for some gaps in standard Dynamics 365 finance. So some basic benefits here. So going through the list, you can use this tool for configuration. So if you acquired another company, you needed to set up a bunch of legal entities, rather than having to do it one by one, you could do so through a single import, where I import a single file to set up many legal entities at the same time. You can also use this for data migration. We'll talk more about the data migration accelerator tool, which is a subset of the AMCS functionality in, I believe it's it's the July 11th webinar. August 1st, I forget. Forgive me, that is, I think that's August 1st one. But what we're going to talk about today is more points 3, 4, and 5. So we'll provide we provide a framework for file or API-based integrations. We provide a simple way to import, approve, and post journals, free text invoices, budget register entries, and also new, I need to update my slide trade agreement journals across legal entities. So I'll show you how you can use a single file to import all the way through to posting that data in D365. And then we also have the ability to extend standard inquiries and reports to generate those reports and inquiries across many legal entities at the same time. So, through this tool, we have clients processing hundreds of millions of lines of journals, invoices, and budget entries a year through automation for thousands of legal entities. So ultimately, the ability or the goal is to drive fewer clicks and allow our customers to scale their businesses. Some of the gaps that we see commonly in D365 that the solution looks to fill is on the multi-company journal management side. You can also apply that to budget register entries, free text invoices, and trade agreements. One of our upcoming webinars, we also talk about budget allocation improvements if you're using the budget planning module in D365, and then global trial balance and agings on the reporting side. Diving deeper into that on the multi-company journal management side, what you'll see today is the ability to submit global journals, how we automate workflow for those. I'll talk about an ideal process flow and then enhanced error handling compared to, say, if you're using DMF or the Excel add-in to import journal data. In the multi-company journals, you can include thousands of lines and hundreds of legal entities in a single import. And then using Azure File Storage, we can automate this whole process. So imagine that you are integrating payroll data from ADP. ADP drops you a periodic file which you need to process across all your legal entities in D365. We can take that file into Azure File Storage, map it to our import, and then import and post that overnight without users ever having to touch the tool, which is nice for audit purposes, that there's no human hands touching your payroll data, and nice for performance reasons because the process happens overnight. So that's the type of automation that we're talking about with this. Some other processes that, again, where we see gaps is on the budget register entry side, where if you are doing budgeting outside of D365, which we see is fairly common, but you need to load the budget register information in order to do your budget to actual reporting, you can load budget register data across legal entities and push it all the way through to the update step. Free text invoices, same thing. You can import data to many companies with one or more invoices per customer, multiple lines per invoice. We'll show that today. And then another nice feature is that, let's say that you are importing a single global journal or single global free text invoice. You can attach the backup documentation at the parent level and pass that through to all the legal entities that journal or invoice goes to. So attach one time for a journal that's going to 10 legal entities, and that goes to each of those 10 journals that get created in the legal entities, and we'll show that. And then trade agreement journals, same process. So when we get into the demo, we'll see more about that. So if you measure, again, one of our goals is to reduce the number of clicks in order to process across legal entities. If you measure the number of clicks it takes to import a journal through DMF with and without workflow based on the number of legal entities, you'll see that the AMCS process is significantly easier. So the total import, with no workflow, the total import to post process using DMF takes approximately 11 clicks, depending on your process. We can do that with AMCS in 4. And so that's 11 clicks per legal entity. So if you're dealing with 1 or 10 or 100 or 1,000 legal entities, that can really add up because we can do it without having to import into each legal entity using AMCS. So if you said that's 6 seconds per click for 100 legal entities, that would save you 110 minutes per import. If you're doing workflow, then even more time or more clicks are necessary. That's approximately 24 clicks to all the way through from the import to submit to workflow, attach documents, approve, and then post. Then, with 100 legal entities, that's a difference of 209 minutes per import. Similarly, on the free text invoice side, the invoice to post with workflow and attachments with a single line. If you're looking at 100 legal entities, it's over 2 hours saved per import. And then, if you had 10 lines, it's you can double that number. So let's talk about the ideal process flow. Let's say that you are importing journal data or free text invoice data from many legal entities, and you have workflow on that particular journal type. It needs to be approved before it can be posted, but it's for multiple legal entities. The ideal process flow is that you import your data straight through to what we call the transfer step, which we'll see when we get into the demo. We can run workflow submission on a batch job, which is an ANCS feature to say for all journals of this type, when I run this batch job, submit it to workflow. So I don't have to go to each journal in each company and submit it manually to workflow, which is the standard process. Let's say that we use Power Automate for that workflow, then users would get the approval requests for those journals or invoices on, in Teams, on their phones, in Outlook with the attachments that came with the journal, and then they could, approve or reject those. And then for approved journals, we can post those globally with a single click. And that's what we'll show today. So let's jump into the demo. And so I am using a standard Contoso demo environment with our add-on installed. So I'm just going to walk through a couple base steps just because I think the time to implementation is an important feature. So you see that under modules, we have the advanced multi-legal entity automation module. And so there's really just a handful of things that we need to configure to be up and running with AMCS. So I'll start with shared parameters. This is a global table. And I need to identify a number sequence for my journal staging table. So right now I have this set up to use for ledger journal imports and customer free text invoice imports are the two things I'm going to show today. So you set up your number sequences. You need to define for each what journal names are relevant. So of all the journal names you have set up in your legal entities, the way that we control these is by matching the journal name here. So this journal name, Journ, exists in each of these legal entities. So it's a one-time, again, this is a global table. I'm saying this is a journal that I want to make available to AMCS, and I'm going to default some behavior based on this. I'm going to say I automatically want to try to post this journal. I want to, if I say attach file, then that's going to attach my import file to all the journals that get created. So my template that I import. And then there's some additional functionality where I can do global invoice check if I'm importing AP data. I can make certain fields mandatory or not. I can require journal attachments and make the system fail if I don't attach a document. And I can also attach company-specific information from a global point. And I'll show that when I get into the file. You can also do workflow at the global level if you wanted to do that instead of doing it at the individual legal entity level. So we set up a couple number sequences. We set up the journal names. And then the last piece we need to do is map our dimensions and, if relevant, financial tags. So the the dimension mapping looks something like this. We support up to 10 financial dimensions out of the box, and we need to map the dimension by legal entity or at a generic level. So for example, my D1 for all companies is business unit. My D2, my dimension 2 for all companies is department. And my dimension 3 is cost center. And then my dimension 4 is item group unless it's one of these two companies. And these two companies, my fourth dimension is product group. So the ability to have to map the dimensions to the import template is there out of the box, and it can be company specific. And that's all there is to the initial setup to AMCS. Once those things are in place, we can grab an import template and we can run with it. So I'm going to go through the import process. I'm going to explain a little bit of what that looks like. And so this ledger journal imports inquiry is a global inquiry found in the module under ledger journal and inquiries and ledger journal imports. From here, I can see everything that's ever been imported. And this is the staging table. This is not a journal. There's no vouchers behind this data. Uh, and I'll demonstrate that here. So if I go to functions, I have a number of different types of imports. These are things that we support out of the box: Zoho expenses, ADP payroll, Ceridian payroll, and we have a couple others that we've implemented for customers but aren't part of the base product yet. We're always looking to add to this list. So if you have specific file formats that you want us to include, we can always discuss that. But generally, the idea is this: in the interest of automation, we have our standard import template, which I'll show you, but probably the data you're going to get directly out of ADP looks a little bit different. And so we need to map the ADP data to the AMCS import format. And so that you can import it without having to do any sort of data manipulation in Excel. You get a file from ADP, you drop it in a folder, it gets processed automatically. So let's take a moment, and I want to show this file. And so if I open this file, so this is what the template looks like, and the columns are modifiable within the template form. There's more fields available than what I have shown here. I have a simple example, but this is a 6-line journal. And so the way to read this is that the company defines in which legal entity the journal will be created. The company line is then the company on the line. And if we were using offset, you could put offset company in here as well. But so I have a number of 2-line entries where reclasses really is the example, where I'm entering from one account to another. And then here I'm entering between 2 legal entities. Down at the bottom, between 2 legal entities, where it'll use the standard intercompany do to do from intercompany accounting setup to post the voucher in between these two. And then these two are in my German company. So I will go through that import to post process. And so if I go to import GL Excel file, and I'm going to import against general journal, I should point out that we support all ledger journal imports. So that means, of course, general journals, AP journals, invoice or payment, AR journals, payment, and fixed asset journals. But I'll choose general journal. And so under this automatic processing, this is asking me, how far do I want the system to try to take my file? So the first one I go through, I'll go through each of the steps. But just to explain it, the open step means just stage the file. Don't do any sort of analysis on it. The check line step is going to do a number of preliminary validations. And again, at this point, there's no journal yet. It's just a staged data. But the check lines is going to check, are my accounts valid? Are my dimensions valid for these legal entities? Are the fiscal periods open? Does a company exist? All the standard validations. So I'm going to push this through to check lines. The transfer line step will then create journals in each of the legal entities. The validate journal step is running the standard validation logic, which is optional. And then the post journal step we'll do the typical posting process, including any standard validation. I should also point out that if there is workflow in the journal, the workflow must be completed before you can post. So I'm going to select that file that I just showed you. And I could also attach a separate file. Let's throw something else in there for visibility. You could have additional heading rows, like if you had additional information in your template. But in our case, we just have a single heading row, which was the different fields that we showed with the transaction date and the company and so on. And I'll say OK. So I'm processing this through to check lines. And here's my file. If I look at it in the lines, it looks like this. Everything checked out OK. We will see how the error handling looks in a moment. Then I'll push this through to transfer. At this moment, it is creating journals in each of the legal entities and adding the lines to them. And if I go back into the lines now that that's transferred and I look at my details, I can go directly to that journal just by clicking the Open Journal button. So I'm in the German company right now. I could switch and I could look at the US company. If I click Open Journal, it'll switch me to the US company and show me that journal. So then I'll skip the validate step and go straight to post. And I'll say, okay. So again, the posting would not work if there was workflow that needed to be processed, but in the interest of time, we'll save that for another day. Anyways, so now both of those journals are posted in both of their legal entities. The intercompany voucher was posted, and maybe we could go look at that quickly. If I go to that journal, I go into the lines, and then I go to down here. I can see that this is my my voucher that would have hit the intercompany, and indeed it hit the intercompany payable. I could look at related vouchers here, and it'll show me the intercompany journal that was created in the German company. Okay, pretty straightforward. Let me show you another one with some errors. So I'm just going to grab that file. So if I go to import file, I'll do general journal. I'll try to push this all the way through to posting, and I'll grab this file. And what's going to happen is that there's a bad financial dimension value. It gives me an error which has some of the details, but what I'd like to do is to go into the status tab from the header, and it shows me by legal entity where my errors are. So it's saying that no item group of this value exists, and then a similar complaint here. If I go into the lines, I can also see by line where the issue is. And I could add the dimensions to the line to update them, or I could go into the dimensions tabs to fix it, or I could delete the journal, fix it in my Excel file if it's too big of a problem, and re-import it from scratch. Okay, and then one last time just to show what it looks like if you push it all the way through to posting without a detailed explanation. And my file has already been processed. I want to show that. It does warn you if you've processed this file before, but I'll push this all the way through to posting. You can also, of course, run this process on a batch. If you're dealing with a large file, you probably want to do that, so it can multi-thread the posting. But you can see that's pushed through and post to all companies. So what does it look like when the process is a little bit more complicated? So let me grab another file here. And so here is a little bit more detailed file where I've got different companies on different charts of accounts and different account structures, and I'm at different currencies and so on. So I just want to show pushing this through to posting that it works equally as well against, I think it's 5 legal entities here. So let me push this one through to posting so we can see what that looks like. And so again, it's going to create the record in the staging table. It's going to check the lines by legal entity. It's going to push those through to journals in each legal entity, and then it's going to post them in each legal entity. And if we were going back to the process flow that we described here, the piece that's missing out of this is the workflow submission automation. If there was workflow in the journal, then we would have that workflow happen before we go back and post. But anyway, so that's gone through and that's posted. If I go to the lines, it'll show me each of my legal entities, and I could go into a specific legal entity to see the journal that gets created therein. Also worth pointing out that my initial import file was attached because of the setting I set on the journal header, and I can see this is the file that I brought in, and I have it there as backup. And if I had attached additional files, they would show up here as well. Okay, so let's swap over into, before I go to free text invoices, I'm going to show the automation piece. And so there's an additional optional setup in the form called ledger journal file import locations. And here we can set a connection with Azure file storage. So if you've ever been in portal.azure, you might know that there's a file storage option here. It's just a cloud, like an extremely inexpensive cloud hosted storage option through Azure. And if I go up in my table browser, so I have a bunch of different directories here. So the ones that we care about are the inbound demo, the archive, and the error folders today. But you can have multiple folders set up for, one for ADP and one for free text invoices and one for GL journals or whatever, where you can drop files and they get processed on a batch behind the scenes. So in the ADP example, we drop the file here in this folder. I'm going to go ahead and grab a file for this, drop it in here. And so this will process behind the scenes. So it's going to, every minute on the minute, I have a pair of batch jobs running. One to sniff this this folder for files, and the second one to process it through based on the defaults on the journal name. And so that's where this all comes in. So the setup here defines this is the journal name that's looking in this location, and use the defaults from this journal name to decide, how are attachments handled, how to what point do I try to process it. And I actually might get an error because I think that's a duplicate file name. So let me just upload a second one here. Apologies for that. Okay. And I'm just going to refresh this and delete this one out. All right, already got processed. Okay, that's fine. But yeah, we define what kind of file it is that we're importing, and then we have some setup information that needs to be done to define, where am I looking for files, where am I archiving them, do I have a file retention policy where I want to auto delete files out of my archive after so many days, and then if I'm dealing with like a password protected Excel file, I can define what is the password and what is the worksheet name that I want to use for my import. So as mentioned, that's being processed behind the scenes. And if I go in here, once that gets picked up and processed, it'll show up in my list. And I expect it to be there shortly. If I go to this pending journal imports, this is my staging table for files. So this is where I can see my file is pending to be picked up, waiting on the batch job. And it's attached here and everything so that I can see it. Now that's gone from here. So if I go back to my ledger journal imports, it'll show up here now. And it'll be processed through to posting per the instructions. So right now it's an open status, and now it's posted. So, if you drop a file overnight, a large payroll file for many legal entities, for example, that's how that process would look. Okay, I'm going to hop over to free text invoices now. So you'll see that the free text invoice process feels very similar. The only thing that you need to configure for this to work beyond what we've already done is we call it journal names, but this is kind of just like a placeholder because there's no concept of a journal with free text invoices. But we need something to drive parameters around attachment behavior, posting behavior, and so on. So that's what this represents. If I go to the customer free text imports menu item, you'll see this looks exactly the same as the journal import form, and I can come in and I can import a CSV or an Excel file. This is my journal name. The Automatic processing doesn't have the validate step, but otherwise is the same. I'll bring this through to check lines. I'll select my file, and I've got this one. And if I look at the lines of this, I want to point out a few things. So this is how the data looks in the import file. And so in this scenario, I have these 3 lines going to the USMF company. We use this concept of an external invoice number. If you've ever tried to import free text invoices using DMF, you'll know that the invoice number shows up as not posted until it's actually posted, which makes DMF a really tricky tool to use for free text invoice imports. You run the risk of overwriting other invoices if you're trying to import using DMF, which is the reason that we developed this solution. So we use this external invoice number as a placeholder for the final invoice number just during the interim step of import. And why does that matter? Well, the external invoice number is what allows the system to know that these 2 lines go together, so that there should be 2 different lines on the free text invoice. Same goes here with these 4 lines. So this is 2 different invoices for the same customer. And so we use the external invoice number to differentiate that these 2 lines should go on one free text invoice and these 2 lines should go on the next. And they should not all be clubbed together in this particular import. So if I go back now, and again, the file's only staged at this point, but once I click transfer, it'll transfer those free text invoices into their respective legal entities. And at this point, they're not yet posted. If I went to the legal entity and I looked at the free text invoice ID, it would say not posted, but I still have a link to it from this form where I can go and I can open that specific invoice that I can see has 2 lines. So if there was any workflow, you'd want that to happen at this point. And then final step would be to post, which of course we could go all the way through to posting without stopping through each step if the scenario is warranted. So point is, this gives us the ability to import free text invoices across many legal entities, customers, many lines per legal entity with a simple import and way fewer clicks than having to do it manually or trying to use DMF, which is risky for overriding data. Okay, so going back to the deck, one thing that we're not covering today in detail, but I can at least show the menu items for it, are trade agreement journals and budget register entries. And so the point is the concepts are all the same. The philosophy behind them are all the same. We use the same setup concepts. We use the same import inquiry concepts. And the only difference is the data format and the templates that make those up. And while we're on that topic, I will show what the template generation looks like. So if I go down to, let's look at the general journal Excel file import. This is how I would generate an import file. So I can come in here and I can generate on the fly which fields I want included in my import template. So the checking or unchecking these boxes will define what fields come out when I export my template. And so I have everything checked right now, just so you can see what that looks like. But here, so these are all the fields that are there available on the GL Excel file import. And if I want to change this, I don't have to do it within D365. If I want to get rid of all my financial tag columns, I can just come in and delete them. All that matters is that the header matches when you do the import, that's what we're matching on. So if you change dimension 1 to be business unit, then the import would fail, but you can add another column here and put business unit above it and then import on the second column. Or you could put in a tooltip for users to see when they use the template. Okay, so back to the deck. There's some additional features on our roadmap, which we did end up covering a couple of these as we talked. So we already talked about the global duplicate invoice checking, um, which is available out of the box, and batch workflow submission. We support financial tags in full. If you're not familiar with the concept of financial tags, they're kind of like financial dimensions light, meant to be used. Well, there's several use cases, but the most common one that we see is to replace something like a projects or an events financial dimension. And again, this is standard D365. We're just supporting it with our tool. But with the way that dimensions work in D365, if you have an endless dimension where you end up with an infinite number of values over time, that can severely bog down your processing speed on journals and validations and trial balances and so on. And so Microsoft recommends using financial tags for those. We did look at the journal attachments copy. One word on advanced workflow. So let's say that you're using invoice capture which is the standard D365 AP automation OCR tool. We have a tweak in the code that allows the process to look something like this. Invoice comes into your mailbox, gets processed through invoice capture, and pushed to D365 with the attachment. Our workflow submission batch job runs automatically and pushes that directly to approvers. And when they get a notification through the approvals app in Teams or in Outlook, it comes with the initial attachment from invoice capture in their inbox, so that they can they don't even have to have a D365 license to be able to review the information, the relevant information for that particular item, and approve or reject it. So support for advanced workflow through Power Automate, I think is a really interesting topic. And then the budget allocation enhancements, I think, is another big one that we'll talk about in another webinar. And then we have a couple roadmap items coming soon. One is dynamic file mapping. Today, if you want to build a file mapping to a payroll provider, that's something that has to be done via code, but we're building a dynamic file mapping that can be done via configuration that'll be available in probably the release after next. And then another one that is valuable when you're dealing with many legal entities is some enhancements to the ledger calendar management. So you can put periods and modules on hold en masse instead of having to go through and do it in the UI or via DMF. So a couple customer case studies. So one is automation, and I've touched on this a lot already, where we have a customer with 45 legal entities. They are using the manual journal imports function, and we use that during the implementation to reduce our data migration time for importing several years of historical data. Um, it saved hundreds of hours over the several rounds of testing we did and go live, because we could import all historical data in a single day. It also makes the testing process more smooth when you have a smooth data migration process, because you're always dealing with data in the same format, the same data. You don't have to fight with your mappings each time when something changes. If you can automate that, I think it's huge value to an implementation. We also automated their payroll and expense imports, so they could drop files in Azure File Storage and have those processed through to posting overnight, as discussed, and have additional ongoing usage where they're processing millions of transactions a quarter. Another case study where we talk about time to value. This is active engagement for us, but a company with over 200 legal entities. It's international, multi-currency. Their primary use case is journal and free text invoice imports. And we said 3 weeks here, but it was actually 2 weeks from the time that the installation was done to them pushing it to production. And their BA team was up and testing after installation plus a 1-hour technical review session. So very, very straightforward tool to use for end users. And final slide here. In conclusion, these are the items where we want to differentiate between standard D365, either using DMF or the Excel add-in, where those tools do have some limitations. where these are features that that AMCS can do out of the box without without need for additional development. That concludes my presentation.